Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March 3rd, 2020 Teaching and Learning Committee meeting of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. Happy Women's History Month to everyone. March is also Music in Our Schools Month, so just to put that plug out there. We're going to get started this afternoon with our Blueprint Update Year 2 presentation. Good afternoon. Yep, just make me.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Heaton. I work in the Office of the Chief of Staff. I will be presenting an update on our intensive learning site program in particular and a little bit on curriculum. I appreciate that you received a full board update in October and a more lengthy update on the student wholeness initiatives only a few months back. So we'll be a little lighter in student wholeness for that reason. Briefly, I'll remind the board that our blueprint is a strategic plan focused on 3 key initiatives: leadership, literacy, and student wholeness. And our intensive learning sites are a strategy for scaling what we see as critical investments to see success in those 3 priority areas. A brief overview of the timeline. We launched our intensive learning sites in the spring of 2018. We learned from implementing those initial sites throughout the course of the school year 2018-2019. In summer of 2019, we scaled to more schools, and we are hopeful to be able to do that again as the original blueprint called for. And so just to situate us, we are now halfway through our 2nd year of implementation, and we will come back to the board again in the fall to talk about what we've learned from year 2. A few notes on literacy. This is detailed in the original blueprint, but essentially our theory is that if we provide schools with high-quality instructional materials, an expert resource who can provide job-embedded coaching, and support schools in routinizing continuous improvement, we will see improvements in instruction in ELA classrooms. So to get there, we're investing in curriculum, coaching, and continuous improvement. I realize that this next slide is one that you've seen before, but I thought it made sense to aggregate some key formative learnings from the first year of implementation. We knew after 1 year that literacy coaches were an essential support for the schools, that schools were reporting positive feedback on the continuous improvement training and how they were learning from other schools in the network. And we also knew that staff were very happy to be receiving additional learning, and in particular, they reported that their site visits to other districts who were implementing curriculum, or to the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, was really positive. They loved that. That said, there was room for growth, which we have tried to address this year and will continue to address in the coming years. Specifically, schools have struggled to define the roles of their various support providers, right? What does my literacy coach do? What does my ACL do? What does my academic planning facilitator do? And I think as a team, we've learned that when you drop new supports into an ecosystem in a school, there can be feedback, right? And we need to be really attentive to role clarity in the future. We also know that staff is interested in tailored learning opportunities. We've heard that from principals and from teachers that they want to know what they should be knowing in their grade that they teach or in the grades that they support in the case of instructional leadership. Okay, a few notes on what we have done in curriculum in the past year. As you know, we've been implementing Wit and Wisdom. This year, we provided additional focus areas to teachers, which were writing, purposeful planning. We're having ongoing success in Wit and Wisdom curriculum implementation, and we see that teachers are taking it up more and pushing back on it less, though we also know we need to do a better job supporting them in their implementation of the curriculum. We've had cohorts of teachers trained in the science of reading through Orton Gillingham and Letters training, and our coaches went through that training as well. Additionally, we are doing site visits again to school districts who are ahead of us in curriculum implementation, but are happy to say that we're being visited by school districts who are looking to implement curriculum now too. Cincinnati Public Schools and a school district from Tennessee have recently come to see how we've been implementing the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. A few more notes here. We purchased geode readables for our early grades, which is a way to, they're produced through a partnership of Wilson and Wit and Wisdom, and it's sort of aligned to foundations and also incorporates the build of content knowledge from Wit and Wisdom. And in addition, this slide there's an error here. We have a new curriculum in our curriculum supplement in kindergarten, which is Hegarty, which provides additional support on phonemic awareness for those early readers. We learned a lot from our implementation of the K-8 curriculum. And in particular, we learned how important it is for us to have an opportunity to test curriculum with teachers and get their feedback over time. So an improvement as we move towards high school ELA curriculum is that in our RFP, we'll be requiring a pilot next year of the curriculum in some of our schools so that we can learn and then pick the very best one for our context. And then finally, I would just say that we continue to make revisions to our middle school and social studies curriculum. We have the addition of the Be More Me curriculum, and we're looking to provide more targeted opportunities for students in those courses to read and write. A few notes on coaching, which I mentioned before as the expert that we're putting in buildings. We now have 40 coaches. The literacy coach provides job-embedded coaching through curriculum-based cycles of professional learning. They continue to develop their expertise. They are trained each Friday here centrally, and they go through these trainings like Letters, Orton, Gillingham, as I mentioned earlier. We expanded our coach leadership. We have Lakin, who is the coordinator of our coaches, and she works with 2 lead coaches to support the coaches in the field. So I always feel like this is a bit meta, but we are coaching our coaches. And then finally, we this quarter have a prioritized coaching indicator. So all of the coaches should be working together on at least one, I'm sure they're working on other things as well, but they're working together on one element in particular, which is shifting the academic struggle from the teacher to the student in quarter 3. John, do you want to add anything? A question? We are trying to get better at getting better with our continuous improvement activities. We have been convening our intensive learning sites over the course of the last year to learn from each other. We have now formalized the Baltimore Secondary Literacy Improvement Community, which we call BSLIC, and that surely ranks as one of the more terrible acronyms that we've had in the district, which I can say because I am the one who came up with it. That community is comprised of 26 schools who are doing root cause analysis on secondary literacy outcomes. We have small clusters working on change ideas. They're doing PDSA cycles on things like how to better plan and prepare for secondary literacy lessons, or which high leverage instructional strategies are most important to be doing during the course of a lesson in secondary literacy. And relatedly, our central office course participated in an online improvement science basics course so that they could help lead this community in their iterative testing. As we did last year, we have designed a thorough literacy survey for use with teachers and other school-based staff, which we'll administer in the spring, and we see as part of our formative evaluation strategy for this initiative. And as we did last year, we will continue to do and we did some actually just in December, ongoing focus groups with ILEDs, literacy coaches, and principals. So if I could just note briefly here, I think the one shift in how we're thinking about a formative evaluation strategy is that we recognize the weakness of last year's efforts where we didn't feel that we had enough teacher voice in the evaluation of the intensive learning site experience. Okay, so what are we doing next? We're continuing to norm the conditions for coaching. We are working on better measures to understand our secondary literacy outcomes so that teachers and schools have the analytics they need to know if their PDSA cycles are leading to movement on what they want. We have schools going on site visits to New Orleans at the end of this month. And as we look to the year ahead, we will continue to invest in curriculum, coaching, and professional learning. We see these as critical to supporting schools. But we also know that we have a tight budget this year, and so we are still in conversation about how many more coaches there will be, and we'll be able to share that with the board in the coming weeks. And then finally, we don't think we've cracked this nut of a core arc of learning for staff by grade bands. And I think there's real energy on the part of our leadership to figure that out so that everyone's really clear that if you teach grade 3, here's what you're supposed to know, and here's the sequence in which you learn what it is you are supposed to know. So I'm going to move to wholeness, but I think it might be useful to give you all a second if you have questions about the literacy component first.
Dr. Bontima,
I'm good.
you sure? Madam Chair?
I'm fine.
I do have a question, though. You mentioned the teacher voice lacked last year as far as intensive learning sites were concerned. Can you elaborate just a bit more on how that has improved and how we're going to continue to incorporate that voice?
Yes. So last year we did survey teachers, but it was not our best survey effort, to be honest, and so we had few responses from the field. This year we're doing a mandatory survey of all intensive learning sites and have been a lot more thoughtful in its design and are going to be putting the manpower behind it in order to make sure that we get the responses from teachers that we're looking for. We're also doing focus groups with teachers. I'm leading some of those, as is the literacy department. Okay, wholeness. Okay, so I'll remind you of the vision. City schools, I'll read, this is the only thing I'm going to read to you, I promise. City school students are inspired to pursue their passions and reach their potential when schools provide engaging, safe, and supportive environments that foster well-being and meet academic, social, and emotional physical needs. A few notes on the wrong button. You've seen the framework before, but when we talk about working on student wholeness in city schools, we talk about work in 3 key areas. The first is safe, welcoming, and joyful learning environments. And this includes not just physical safety, but the strong sense of community that we want in our schools and a positive climate. The second area is healthy, connected, supported students and adults. And we emphasize that adults are included here because we know how important adult mindsets are for engaging students and for building relationships with our students. And then finally, just one other thing here. We think the key to this bucket is the need to build relationships in order to ensure a continuum of support for students. Though I would also add this is where we see physical well-being too, like health class and recess and activities that students can participate like sports, as well as addressing medical needs like nursing care and mental health. And then our third area of work is engaged, enriched, and inspired learners. So how do we make school a place where students want to come? And how can we remove attendance barriers? And finally, how do we ensure that all students have opportunities to explore their passions so that they know what they want to do later in life? And 2 other things about the framework in which we're operating here is that we don't think anything is possible in these 3 areas if we're not attending to equity and considering how we provide access to all students and also how we attend to our community and family engagement throughout the process. So a quick refresher on our intensive learning sites because they're a little different than the literacy sites. In year 1, our first cohort, you heard about 35 intensive learning sites. 20 of those were social emotional learning sites and 15 were restorative practice sites. In year 2, we have 21 student wholeness sites. I'll talk more about this in a second. To ground us in our learnings from year 1, I included this slide again. Here were some things that we learned last year. The Wholeness Room is a safe, helpful place. Students felt really safe in that. Like 85% of the students who we surveyed, something like 1,500 of them, said that this was a safe place for them to go. The wholeness specialists had quickly become essential to the operations of their school building, according to principals and ILEDs. And generally, staff were reporting that they thought a focus on social emotional learning and restorative practices was a really good idea. About 75% of teachers were saying that, even though, as we learned, and this goes to our room for growth, they don't exactly know what that is yet. And so we knew we needed to pay a lot of attention to professional learning in the coming years of our work. And in addition, schools wanted a lot more support on their school-wide SEL plan. It felt very much to them like a compliance exercise rather than something that was helping to drive student wholeness in their building. So, what have we done here? First, we integrated SEL and RP into one experience for Cohort 2. So those 21 sites have received SEL training and are building a student wholeness plan, they're also receiving RP coaching from some of our partner vendors. And this is actually a national trend. In Atlanta and other districts where there was a focus on SEL or RP as separate approaches, districts are working now to try to braid those experiences for the schools. And in fact, our wholeness team is in Atlanta learning from how that team did just that in the last several years. They're doing that right now, these next 2 days. We completed wholeness needs and resource inventory for Cohort 2, so we asked those schools to look at what programs and activities they had going on in their buildings on which they could build in the coming year, and as they wrote their wholeness plan, that was our attempt to make sure that we changed that plan from one of compliance to one of strategic importance to the school. We also provided calming corners to Cohort 1 schools. There are 5 per school now. We developed guidance and a briefing for staff members, and our principals and our teachers are going to report out on the effectiveness of those calming corners in the year, or over the course of this year, when they take their survey in the spring months. We had a great cross-cohort collaborative for all 3 of these cohorts, which is the RP, the SEL from Cohort 1, and then the Cohort 2 schools. It was a half-day event. More than 100 people showed up. It was essentially a district-run conference. And we've continued to do professional learning sessions for Cohorts 1 and 2 throughout the fall and now the winter months. One other thing I would like to note is that we have our Cohort 1 schools received seed funding to invest in a partner to help them work on their student wholeness in their schools. So the Cohort 1 schools selected partners like A Leader in Me or Positive School Center or Holistic Life Foundation, and they're working now with those partner vendors to implement their wholeness plans. Okay, what are we doing next? Well, we're going to continue doing professional learning, and in particular, we'll be focused on positive classroom environments, adult social emotional learning, and childhood development and brain science. The Cohort 1 schools are now revising their plans after looking at their data, and the Cohort 2 schools, since they did that needs assessment, are now moving into developing their plans. And so we're hopeful that these plans will turn into something that they can reference over years ahead rather than something that's a compliance activity. We have a strong survey of students and staff, which will go out in the spring, and we're hopeful that through that survey we'll be able to show growth in our intensive learning sites from year 1 of implementation. Every one of our student wholeness sites is going to participate in, or we're supporting them we will be supporting them host a family engagement night around their intensive learning site work. This feels like a good start, but we know it's not really the A game of family engagement, which is what we'll be looking to improve upon in the year ahead. And then we'll continue with the cross-cohort engagement and the cross-district learning visits. In fact, as I mentioned, we have a delegation which includes principals in Atlanta right now, and we have several cohort school representatives who are scheduled to attend a site visit to Nashville at the end of the month, though it may well be that that has to be changed depending on how the Metro Nashville Public Schools, how things go following the disaster there. John.
Probably another thing I'd want to add to this conversation is, as we've been going through budget discussions, we are going to put a larger emphasis on an entire culture and climate plan for schools. And we think this falls well within the student wholeness work. A lot of times the RP work and the SEL work does begin to change the culture, but it doesn't always give a full scope of an intentional culture and climate plan. And that's not listed up there, but I wanted to tell the 3 of you that because I think we will begin to put more effort on that, especially to schools where we know that the culture and climate can be improved.
Chief, how intense will that plan and the development of that plan be?
Our initial thinking, and again, right, we're still going through budget discussions and stuff, so I don't want to put a complete stake in the ground, but our initial thinking is In the summer, we would bring leadership teams together, and they would create a plan for the school, everything around how celebrations go, to what the building should look like inside, to common practices across classrooms, so that the school is literally functioning as one around culture and climate. After they spend time in the summer, we will also put funds forth so that they can bring their teachers back a day early to roll this out with them and give them additional support before the 4 days that they usually get. And so we do want it to be very intentional, and we do want it to be as comprehensive as possible. Additionally, we would then support them throughout the year by going in and doing walkthroughs and saying, hey, we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. How are we doing with that? Right? Has it helped with attendance? Has it helped with culture overall? So it's not just kind of a summer planning thing, but it's also a through the year monitoring based on the plan that they create.
I appreciate you saying comprehensive, because I would hate for it to be so much on a school to monitor that.
Yes.
And to not have the consistent check-ins throughout the course of the year. So I appreciate you saying that, because it would be another layer of expectation on schools, but we want to make sure that they're able to actually implement those plans with fidelity.
Yes.
And not be so burdened with another thing to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I hope that it isn't looked at that, right?
Okay.
I hope that the schools we pick know that they have work to do on that and will relish the time to actually get away in the summer and plan appropriately, because a lot of times summer flies by and all of a sudden the beginning of the school year and maybe you haven't been as intentional as possible. I think additionally, like I linked it to the budget because in the student wholeness team, we don't have people dedicated to that. So we are considering a couple of people to help the schools and support the schools, like you said, so it's not all on them, but it is people that are coming in and helping and giving them feedback and trying to figure out how to help them and take a next step forward if they're not quite meeting the plan the way they originally designed it.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you.
Just one follow-up. Will these be schools that are self-selected, or these are schools that are going to be recommended through?
It's going to be
ILED?
recommended, right? I mean, between the data, you can look at things like suspensions, you can look at attendance, but also we can look at our schools office team, like the ILEDs, and they know walking into schools the ones that need to tighten up or not. So we will come to them and say, we really think that you should do this.
Okay, I'm happy to take questions, but that really ends the presentation.
Commissioner Chenye?
Oh,
Devondima?
I'm good, thank you.
I appreciate the mention of brain science in the ongoing professional learning plan for staff members. Executive functioning is a crucial area to consider when we're thinking about student wholeness and particularly trauma. And that's one thing that I didn't hear much about in this presentation, but I know that there are schools that are focused on trauma-informed pedagogy. And I think it's just important to raise that in the discussion because a lot of our students are impacted by trauma, which then results in them having to receive additional supports, both in restorative practice and things like that. So just wanted to raise the trauma. And being in a city like ours, I think it's important to note that for a lot of the young people that are experiencing trauma that a lot of us just don't understand.
Noted.
And also with the engagement with families, I'm curious to know if we've actually gotten some information from families to see how they prefer to be engaged around things like this. Because I think as a district, I think it becomes important for us to do that so that we get the greatest yield from the community if we actually get the feedback on how best do they prefer to be engaged, what ways and what methods.
I think that is a great point. With user-centered design principle, we should ask families how they want information or how they can best engage. Thank you.
I appreciate But thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you, Chief Davis. It's good to have you in our meeting, Chief, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
We are now ready for our next presentation, which will focus on teacher and principal pipeline.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Deal. I'm Executive Director of Recruitment and Staffing Solutions in the Human Capital Office. And introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Roxanne Four, the Director of Principal Leadership Development.
And hi, I'm Jeremy Grant Skinner, Chief Human Capital Officer.
All right, so we're eager to share our biannual teacher and principal pipeline update with you today. Today's update is slightly different to previous updates. I think traditionally we've shared an update regarding a number of our pipeline programs, and today we're really going to dive more deeply into one on the teacher front and one on the principal front. So we're going to focus in on urban teachers on the teacher front and the assistant principal accelerator program on the principal side. Additionally, as you'll notice, the fiscal year 21 Urban Teachers Board Letter is on the agenda today, so it seemed a great opportunity to provide everybody with more information about that program. Oops. All right. So Maryland is a state that prepares half the number of new teachers needed annually, and therefore imports a significant percentage of new teachers from other states. So as you know, enrollment in education programs is on the decline nationally and has been for the last several years. More regionally, a recent Department of Education statistic indicated that between 2010 and 2018, the percentage of enrollees in Maryland education programs declined 41%, which is a trend that holds true in neighboring states as well. So I looked at Pennsylvania and Delaware as examples. This chart shows new teacher hires by pipeline over time, so from 2012 to 2019. You can see each of our alt-route prep programs, Teach for America, Baltimore City Teaching Residency, and Urban Teachers, traditional hires in orange, and then day one teacher vacancies in red to show the total demand for teachers by year. So in 2019, for example, you can see that a little over 1/3 of our teachers came from our combined alt-route programs, and the rest came from traditional pathways. And it is important to note here that our teacher retention was about 85% this past year, so additional position creation rather than increased attrition is what led us to need to hire over 750 teachers if we filled all of the vacancies in 2019. The last thing I'll add here is that given that the presentation is focused on urban teachers, I do want to say that this shows the significant expansion of the program over time. So as you can see, in 2012, we hired 14 teachers through the UT program and 67 in 2019. All right, so combined, we've partnered with our 3 alt-route programs for over 5 decades to recruit, select, train, and support over 200 teachers annually. In addition to providing a little more than 1/3 of our teachers annually, alt-route programs allow us to extend our recruitment reach and focus on high-needs content areas. So this year, we prioritized the placement of alt-route teachers in highest need schools, such as Title I schools and concentrations of poverty schools. And while this approach initially originated due to funding necessity, we do agree with prioritizing teachers for some of our highest need schools. And so as you can see, this paid off in a couple of ways. So the first is that the number of fully staffed concentration of poverty schools increased by 10. And then the second bullet point, so the schools with the least historical investment per the Community Conditions Index were the most likely to be fully staffed on the first day of school, in part due to the strategy. All right, so this chart shows the new teacher hires by content area. So as you can see, elementary, English, math, and special ed were among the content areas with the most new teachers for the 1920 school year. As examples, we hired 35% of our new hires were elementary teachers, about 16 or 17% were special education teachers for the 1920 school year. As you can see in the column to the right, Urban Teachers meets all of these needs as they certify teachers in elementary and the secondary, math, and English content areas, all of which are also dual certified in special education. And I do want to note here that a couple of years ago, we discussed with Urban Teachers seeking to increase the percentage of teachers who transition to special education positions. And they actually started some special education pilot schools. I believe that there are 7 of them this year, where they work with the residents to discern who is interested in teaching special education and work with the schools to make sure that they have the structure and capacity to support a special education residency program. UT residents participate in a year-long residency before transitioning to become teachers of record with city schools. So the goal of the residency is 1, to develop residents' capacity to become effective teachers, 2, to provide additional capacity to the school, and 3, a pipeline of teachers to the placement schools as well. So what does this residency year look like? So as you can see, residents receive a stipend during the residency year. Residents, during the day, they work alongside a host teacher for about 34 hours a week, supporting with whole group instruction, small group instruction, individual instruction. During the evenings, they attend coursework that is aligned to the content area, focused on math and literacy standards. And then finally, they also receive 35 hours of coaching from an Urban Teachers coach, just to make sure that they are prepared to become teachers at the end of the residency year. Finally, residents transition to full-time teachers after successful completion of the residency year. This means that they have demonstrated effective teaching. They are on route to receive their resident teaching certificate, and they're on path with the coursework that they need to complete. All right, so this slide details a bit about our current resident teacher placement strategy. So Urban Teachers originally worked with individual school leaders to discern the placements for residents. So as you can see, 1/3 of the residents for school year 1920 were funded directly by school budgets. So 2 years ago, we decided to centrally fund a portion of residents with Title I dollars, and these 2 bullets list our placement strategy for the centrally funded residents. As you can see, it is very specific, in part so that we could effectively explain our strategy, but also because if we're going to target residents centrally, we want to make sure that they are supporting these schools, providing additional capacity to these schools, and a pipeline of teachers as well. This slide shows 2 data points related to resident to teacher assignment data. So on the left, you'll see that over 80% of last year's UT residents were assigned to Title I schools at the start of this school year. This is the first time that we have calculated this data point, but we'll certainly keep it in mind moving forward, just to make sure that the Title I investment is actually yielding teachers for Title I schools. On the right, you can see that nearly half of last year's UT residents stayed at their school of residency for this school year. So we do anticipate, so there are some residency schools where they don't have vacancies or they don't have a vacancy in the content area for the resident. So we do anticipate that some portion of the residents will transition to other schools for the following year. Okay. All right, so there were 94 residents that started their residency year for the 1920 school year, and there are currently 83 residents serving in classrooms at this time. So as you can see, 43% of those will be certified in secondary content areas, all of which will be certified in special education. 56 of the current, you have a question? Of the current resident cohort identify as people of color, and that is actually on track or similar to the previous 4 cohorts that have all had 50% or higher of the residency cohorts identify as people of color. And then the last data points, you can see the percent of first-generation college graduates, percent of male teacher residents, and then the average GPA, undergraduate GPA of this current cohort is a 3.4. All right, we wanted to close the UT section by talking about our fiscal year 1 urban teacher strategy. I just want to highlight a couple of things. One, we'd like to increase the centrally funded residents by 20%, so up to 70, retaining the 35 that are going to be funded by the schools for a total of about 105 urban teacher residents for the 2021 school year. We'd like to explore leveraging funding in addition to the Title I and the SIG 4 funding that we've historically used to potentially allow for additional high school placements for the upcoming school year. And then finally, the final bullet, we do want to work together to explore a longer-term strategy that's sustainable for both urban teachers and city schools. So residency models are effective, they are also expensive, and so we are currently in conversations to discern how we can make this program viable for both ourselves and urban teachers. Do you want to take questions for the UT portion before we move on? Or?
Yes.
Dr. Bondima?
Okay, thank you. I think you might have answered this question earlier, but I wasn't too clear on it. The students or the teachers in the program, they're new, recently graduate students, new graduated from the undergrad, these students. So do you have transfer teachers from other districts out of state in these programs?
So it's possible for out-of-state residents to apply for these programs, but once you're in the UT program, the cohort sort of moves from residency to become teachers.
Okay. And another thing, how do you guarantee that the teachers who are in the program will actually, after they complete the program, will stay in the system? Do you have a commitment that they have to be in it? What type of commitment do they have to give us for the program?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a guarantee. I will say that the UT program is actually 4 years long. So it includes the residency year plus 3 full years in order to officially matriculate through the program.
So when they complete the program, 4 years, and they go into the classroom, we hope that they will do that.
Stay in the classroom.
Stay in the classroom. But so maybe they might decide that they do not want to stay in the system. They want to transfer out or they want to leave. Do we have any commitment? Do they have to sign a contract? They don't sign anything. So they get all of this training, and then if they decide they want to leave, they can without any penalty after 4 years?
I would just add to what Sarah shared. They can, after the 4-year program ends, choose to leave the district. We can incorporate into the board letter what their retention rate is because urban teachers have a pretty high retention rate. And I would say, just as a clarification, so the residency, when they're not yet a teacher, but they're in training, is the first year of those 4 years. So years 2, 3, and 4, they're continuing to get support from urban teachers, and they're continuing to work toward professional certification, and they are teachers for those 3 years. So 3 of the 4 years in the program, they are serving as full-time teachers.
And the reason why I'm asking that question is this program sounds like a really excellent program. I would think that other districts would be looking at our program, even maybe want to model behind our program. My greatest concern, like I've seen happen in different areas, that they get all this wonderful training, they go into the classroom doing a fantastic job, and they get recruited out to another district, and I worry about that. And you say you had 80% of the, I think you have 80% success rate with the program? What happens with the 20%? What do you can't,
Yep.
I mean, just off the top. What
Yeah.
do you-
So I think either they discern that teaching is not right for them, or they do not meet urban teachers' criteria in order to be ready to transition to a teacher at the start of the following year.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you very much.
Sure.
To that, generally, where does urban teachers, where do they recruit their folks from? Can you elaborate on that a bit? They do that, we don't do that, right?
They do that.
Okay.
They do that. I don't know if I have enough specifics. I do know they recruit nationally, they recruit locally. Do you know more?
Yeah, I don't know the percentages of what their recent cohort is, but I will say Urban Teachers is a national program, but we're the original site of Urban Teachers, and we are only one of 3. So when they are recruiting nationally, they're recruiting only for us and 2 other districts. But we could also incorporate just information about the percentage of the incoming cohort that is from Baltimore and Maryland.
I was just curious to know how they how they were recruited, and potentially, to your point, where they're recruited from, maybe specific schools or things like that. I'm sure you all cross that information from time to time, so I was just curious. Dr. Bondima?
I still have another question or a comment.
Sure.
And again, I want to say how this sounds like a wonderful program. But I would think about, and as you move through the program, to think about incentives that you would enclose in the program, where after the 4 years, an incentive to keep a teacher here. Because what is the average time that a new teacher actually stay employed in any system in an urban community? About how many years?
Yeah, it's a low percentage relatively in our district and others who make it past 5 years of new
Okay.
teachers, so less than half.
So there you go. And my concern is, as we move through the program, not today, but as we move through and we see how the program is going, I would encourage us to not think about it later, but think about after the 4 years, what type of incentives would we install into the program to hold on to that teacher that we have invested so much time and money and talent and resources into the program. What can we do to hold on to those stellar teachers? You know what I mean? Thank you.
Commissioner Cheney?
Yeah, I mean, I would, one response I would say would be some of the things that we do right now in terms of trying to retain our teachers and some of the opportunities that they may have. So that might be one of those, and we probably would do some descriptions of those later. The residency, though, it's very interesting because I know that some of the recommendations that are coming with the legislation around from Kerwin is calling for pretty much what you're doing now, which is the equivalent of a year of internship. So it'd be interesting as you look at that in terms of staying aligned with, because I do think that's one of the strong points of the urban teacher program. So just a caution that we probably want to really look at that carefully before making changes.
And finally, just to kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier with the blueprint, where is Urban Teachers and It's the new teacher project also. We'll see it in procurement a little later. How are they implementing learning around trauma and responsive instruction? That's something that I did not really see in the board letter and also in the presentation. So a lot of it is, yes, and I'm also speaking from a place of someone that mentors new teachers, and at the collegiate level often they're not giving those tools. And so for a program like this that we believe to be successful in this district and in other districts, how are we then partnering with them to ensure that a lot of what their training entails also involves responsive instruction to individual student needs, but also that trauma-informed care, I think, is a big piece for what we do. I'm not sure how we can communicate with those organizations for that, but I think it's important. If we invest in a program like this and we're prepping them for our critical needs schools, particularly in literacy and math, I think it's also important to focus a bit more on and the special education, but also with the trauma and being responsive to individual student needs.
All right, we are going to transition to the pathways for principalship. We do have multiple pathways, and today the one that we're going to highlight and focus is the AP Accelerator Program. This is a program that really is designed for our existing experienced assistant principals who have a desire to move into the principalship and would benefit and want the experiences of working in a cohort and really refining some of the skills that they have. So we did launch this year. It's in its first year. The criteria was and still remains 3 years of effective ratings. They had to have a recommendation from principal and or ILED. And then there was a written application as well as a panel interview that included a variety of stakeholders in that interview. So from that process, we launched our first cohort. What we have done with them throughout the entire year, it is designed around the leadership framework. We want to make sure that the PD that we are providing is aligned to the expectations and the criteria that we have determined our leaders need to really be successful. So it is aligned to that, and within that, we embed a capstone project. This is a project that will stretch the assistant principal while still benefiting the school that they're at. So what is it that the school really has a need for, and still pushing outside of their comfort zone to help them grow. Within that, we provide leadership coaching so that the coaching is happening in the school, around the project, and with the children and the school community. We also make sure that we are embedding data. We're embedding feedback to teachers and grooming teachers. We are also looking at how do we really manage teams in order to make this work. We had a summer launch. We did 2 full days of development, and then we transitioned into half-day sessions throughout the summer, and these were sessions that were held at the assistant principal's school. We really wanted to make sure that it was focused on the needs of this current school. Throughout the year, we do monthly development sessions. We do half-day Saturday sessions, as well as the coaching that they are getting continuously. We do have a current cohort of 6 in this project, and we have one that has already been selected and board approved for a charter school founding principal. We have 2 others who are in managing and or short-term interim principal roles. So unfortunately, we know sometimes openings happen during the school year, and this has also provided a way for us to make sure that we have folks who can step in, continue to keep the school moving, and still continue their development as we move through it. What we have learned and what we have heard this year as we are trying to really receive feedback so we know next directions, we really see that the trends are telling us that we need to continue to focus on instructional leadership. That is a need that they need as they move into the principalship, as well as coaching around how do I develop my staff, how do I provide PD that is really going to impact student outcomes. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing, as well as the need to form a cohort and network with additional folks who are in the same position. They find that very beneficial, that now they have a colleague to call, to lean on, to really help when they have questions or aren't sure what their next step should be, as well as time management has been a key ask that we have helped to coach them through that will hopefully yield a positive result as they move into the role. Questions, comments?
Commissioner Cheney?
What has been the experience in terms of the relationship and the ability to, with this additional work that these assistant principals are doing with their assignment in a school with with the principal? How has that been working?
Yeah, that's part of the summer half-day coaching that we do, because we are meeting with the principal from day one. This is the program, and they know ahead of time and have signed off, so we talk to them as well. This is a project that they want to do. What is the impact on the school? Is there a need for this in your school? So it's really matched that while we are stretching the AP, it is benefiting the school. So we keep the principal involved throughout the entire year.
I am just processing a bit, but in the meantime, I'm curious to know how this work is intertwined with the work of the assistant principal evaluation that I believe we're about to pilot.
Correct.
How is this process with the pipeline linked to or informing that evaluation work that's happening?
Mm-hmm. So initially, we launched this program prior to having that framework. So we were looking at the principal leadership when we initially launched it, but then as the evaluation, the AP evaluation came to fruition also, we started looking at that. So we are, in conjunction with the principal at each school, looking at strengths and weaknesses continuously using that framework. What is this telling us about the strengths? What is this telling us about growth opportunities that we should be helping to coach as the principal is working on those as well?
We also, the alignment of those things should also help us in future iterations or future cohorts of the AP Accelerator, because we will have better information at the time of selection, which goes beyond the direct experience a principal has with an assistant principal they've been supervising, and instead shows us a more robust picture of what that assistant principal's performance has been, so that we can better identify the best candidates to enter into this.
And then hopefully retain them. I think that's the goal. Doesn't seem like we have any more questions, so thank you all for the presentation.
Thank you.
It is exciting, and hopefully we can continue to retain very strong leaders for our schools. Thank you. always feel so great in these meetings when I get to sit in between folks like Commissioner Chinya, an extremely seasoned educator, in addition to Dr. Bondima. Just love this. But then also, Tanisha Moore is with us today, and she's extremely helpful in these meetings, so thank you. We are now ready for our semi-annual special education update with Dr. Brooks and her team. So welcome, everyone. It's good to see you, and we're ready for you.
Good afternoon, Deborah Brooks, Executive Director of Special Education.
Hi, Crystal Francis, Director, Early Learning Programs.
Good afternoon, Jalima Elisea, Director of Specialized Learning.
Good afternoon, Dawn A. Bushraw, Director of Inclusion, Office of Special Education.
And this afternoon, we will be sharing with you the semi-annual special education update. So we want to begin by just grounding you again in the special education priorities. Again, ensuring that we are educating students with disabilities in their least restrictive environment. And I want to highlight and underline the word there, because as we know, students' least restrictive environment for some students is educating them with their typical peers in the general ed setting. But for some students, their least restrictive environment may be in a non-public setting. So I just want to be very clear that we educate students in their least restrictive environment. Also, ensuring that all students have access to high-quality instruction and services, regardless of what their disability is, but ensuring that all students have access to high-quality instruction and services. And in doing so, closing or narrowing that achievement gap. We also make sure that we intentionally collaborate with multiple offices. Just as you see here at the table, there are multiple offices, but we also partner with College and Career Ready, with Student Wholeness, with the school's office, as well as OAA, during our monthly STAT meeting, at which time we look at special education data. We look at it district-wide, then based upon our community learning networks, our schools, and drill down to student data, with an intentional focus on the least restrictive environment, as well as suspension data, as well as exit data, and with an intentional focus also on race, to see who are those students that we are identifying and where those students are actually receiving their services. Again, a focus on least restrictive environment. From that data, it then informs our professional development, how we're supporting schools, most importantly, general educators and special educators, as well as our school leaders and our parents and community partners. And then taking that also professional development and tiering it, providing a tiered system of supports, specifically for those teachers that may need additional support, and then for our students. So as we share with you today, the semi-annual update, we're really going to be focusing on the work, and the work as it's aligned to the state's 3 imperatives. So as we talk about disproportionality and specially designed instruction, that's aligned to the state's access, equity, and progress. You're going to hear about early childhood and early learning, which is aligned, and then secondary transition. So again, when we talk about the disproportionality, again, it's around the least restrictive environment, as well as over-identification and suspensions, and then the work we're doing to really talk about how we're providing additional supports to our schools so that we're providing students in their least restrictive environment their services, as well as what we're doing to alternative means from suspension, and then how we're providing that specially designed instruction in the student's least restrictive environment by both the general educator and the special educator. Our early learning practices for our babies, our young children before they become school age, and then once they're school age, and then post-secondary opportunities. So as we begin, first, even prior to identification, working very closely with teaching and learning, providing professional development for our student support teams and for our 504 chairs. And this is prior to a student having an IEP. We provide monthly webinars for those quarterly webinars for our 504 chairs and SST teams to talk about tiered interventions, both behavioral and academics. We also have a newly formed LRE focus group where we've had 3 meetings thus far. And earlier, there were teachers as well as other staff that came before the board to talk about multi-grade classrooms. Well, this has been a focus of our LRE focus group, where we've even pulled in those teachers that came before the board. And we have really focused in on reviewing the data, talking about the IEP decision-making, really looking at staffing and budgeting, how we can collaborate and really talk about what does it look like for some of our smaller schools when we're looking at staffing and how they can provide that direct instruction for our students with disabilities. Again, with an intentional focus on race. Who are those students that are receiving those services in a more restrictive environment of LREC? On this focus group, again, we have teachers, we have building administrators, we have a consultant, we have ILEDs on that focus group, we have members from teaching and learning, as well as from the Office of Special Education. The goal of this focus group is for us to come up with a 3-year plan to be able to say how we can provide greater instruction for our students with disabilities without having multi-grades within a self-contained environment, but a really focus on how can we have more students have inclusive opportunities to be included with their typical peers. Again, I want to ground us that in city schools, we provide a continuum of services for our students that are receiving specially designed instruction, with students from LREA inside the general ed setting 80% or more to LREG for those students that may need to be in a non-public setting to receive their services. Currently, the state target is to have 70.9% of students with disabilities receiving their services with their typical peers. Currently, Baltimore City Public Schools, we are at 57.3%. which is about 36% of our schools meeting that target, which is 59 schools. The majority of those schools are elementary middle schools, where we have about 30 of those schools actually meeting that target, and 12 schools are actually high schools. Again, through our LRE focus group and then the targeted support that we're providing, really looking at how we're scheduling for our students. Again, looking at the IEP decision-making when we're determining where a student is receiving services and having courageous conversations. What is it about the student that says that he or she cannot receive their services with their typical peers? When we begin to look at the movement of students, we're finding that there are more students that are actually moving into a less restrictive environment. So we're beginning to see a positive movement where more students are beginning to have their instruction provided in the general education setting with their typical peers, with those additional supports in place for those students. We're seeing that there is less movement for more restrictive, non-public or separate public day school. Again, the trend shows us that for our youngest learners, they begin starting out to be in the general ed setting with their typical peers, and we begin to see a decline of students with their typical peers around the 3rd grade. It seems to remain steady in the middle grades, where the students are remaining in a self-contained environment or pulled out from being with their typical peers. And we begin to see an increase again in high school. So we are focusing on grades 3 through 8 and working very closely with those grade bands and with those teachers. What we did find is that as we're working and reviewing the data, a lot of the students are in a more restrictive environment of LREC because of behavior. So we do have a behavior consultation team that is working very closely with schools to look at alternative ways of discipline through conscious discipline. Also really looking at adverse childhood experiences that many of our students have faced and looking at trauma-informed practices and care. And so we have clinics monthly where schools bring teams to be able to talk about alternative practices and get some additional training of how to be able to work with students that may show up in different ways. And so these teams consist of teachers, administrators, paraeducators, and related service providers so that we can look at alternative ways and also develop discipline plans within our schools. We've also, as many of you are aware, began a district-wide de-escalation training with training over 600 staff during the 18-19 school year. And so far this school year, we've trained over 323 staff with our de-escalation training. The de-escalation training has included board members. It has also included the cafeteria workers, bus drivers and bus aides, building administrators, general educators, special educators. We've also included central office staff, related service providers. And so we will continue the de-escalation training district-wide.
Commissioner Cheney.
I just wanted to clarify in terms of the behavior consultation team, that's both general educators and as well as special educators that are part of that team?
Yes, it is.
Great, okay.
So as we begin to look at our suspensions, we have seen, as far as the overall suspensions of students with disabilities, we have begun to work very closely with our practices again around suspending students with disabilities. The risk ratio for disproportionality is 3.0, and so 118 out of the 169 schools have met the risk ratio, and we're seeing an improvement, again, through providing alternative means to suspension, providing additional supports, working very closely with our student wholeness teams, restorative practices, trauma-informed care practices, working, again, both with general educators as well as special educators. And so, again, as we are talking about really narrowing the gap for all students, we know that if we begin with our youngest learners, then in providing those supports for our youngest learners, we will have a greater return as our students continue to matriculate throughout their schooling. And so I'll transition to early learning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Here we go.
Give us 1 second,
Oh,
Dr.
sure.
Bundini. No, Dr. Bundini.
No, I have to stop right here. I really just enjoyed your presentation. I felt like you were doing a dissertation defense because I'm always talking about, and you know what I'm talking about, when you put that PowerPoint up there, you didn't even look at the PowerPoint. And you took everything there and you answered everything and made it very, very clear. And I'm so impressed. And this is one of the things that we encourage. Put that PowerPoint up there and tell us the story. And you really just told me the story in detail, and I'm so appreciative of that. And I don't know if you noticed I was smiling as you were presenting because I'm just enjoying your presentation. And I'm not everybody else, everything is fine. I just wanted you to know that, and I'll give credit where credit is due. I understood everything that you were saying. Thank you so much. I had to say that.
All right. Well, now I have to follow Dr. Brooks. Okay. So we wanted to, you have a question? Oh. I know. To be really, really good at this. Okay. So we wanted to just give a quick kind of introduction to what we're working on in Office of Early Learning. The two main imperatives that are coming from the state are around inclusion and around early intervention coaching. So when it comes to inclusion, the MSDE percentages that they are averaging for their classrooms are 59.6% of their students with disabilities ages 3, 4, and 5 are being included in general education. Here in Baltimore City, that is 75.8% for us. So we actually are exceeding the state target. So that means that more of our students are actually with their typically developing peers. And even as we continue to look at our classrooms, we're really trying to make sure that the model of our inclusive programs are very, very strong. It's not easy for a lot of people. You often have to overcome a lot of attitudes and changes on the minds of the adults in the room. And so that's kind of our next phase of how we can really work to tackle that, to make sure that, that we're providing the best possible programming for all of our students. Next, we have the early intervention coaching model. MSDE has moved towards a model of coaching for students with disabilities, ages 0 to 3, and moving away from providing direct services to students. So again, as we know that parents obviously spend the most time with their children, so the imperative is really on making sure that we are supporting parents in all of their efforts and just their day-to-day routines and helping them to really begin to start to see changes within their daily lives as they support their children. So we are training all of our early intervention staff on this coaching model. So we have staff who are in cohorts each year, and they go through a coaching, they get master coaching, and then we eventually will end up with hopefully a whole cohort full of master coaches who are all fully trained in this model. We have partnered with the Baltimore City Health Department as they are the local lead agency for our infants and toddlers program, and also are collaboratively training our related service providers who also see our 0 to 3 students.
So as all of our students with IEPs receive specially designed instruction, regardless of what their least restrictive environment is, we have really focused the last 2 years partnering with Teaching and Learning on ensuring that both general educators and special educators really understand what SDI is, specially designed instruction, and what that looks like for a student with disabilities. And so we're going to now begin to talk about the work that has been done.
All right, good afternoon. So I'm going to talk about how we're addressing specially designed instruction through strategic collaboration, data-informed decision-making, evidence-based practices, and professional development. So really excited about the work that we've done this year. We've been able to offer professional development to special education teachers in the area of literacy, really focusing on how to align specially designed instruction. So showing teachers how to be intentional with their planning and taking the IEP and aligning that to curriculum. As you heard earlier, there's also been a focus on letters training, really ensuring not only our general education teachers, but our special education teachers as well also have an understanding of those foundational skills and literacy and the brain research behind how children learn how to read. There's also been professional development that has been targeted for our citywide teachers, as well as our teachers, as Dr. Brooks spoke about earlier, our multi-grade teachers, really providing them that additional layer of support. We've also focused this year on high leverage practices in special education, and really those are research-based practices that have shown improved outcomes for students, inclusive of students with disabilities. So really intentional about how we are aligning those practices to specific areas of focus in literacy. So for example, you heard earlier about productive struggle and a focus on that in literacy. So one of the professional developments we offered to teachers this year was thinking about metacognitive and cognitive strategies for students with disabilities and how that really aligns to productive struggle. In addition, this year, we've had an intentional focus on really building the capacity of our instructional leads, so our academic planning facilitators. So on those design teams for both math and literacy, we have a special education liaison from Teaching and Learning who sits on that design team to really ensure that we are intentional about aligning specially designed instruction to the inputs that all APFs and instructional leads receive to build their capacity so that they can expand that reach to their teachers as well. And then coaching support from our special education liaisons. So now we will look at our DIBELS data. This is the beginning of the year to middle of the year. One thing I do want to note, as I've noted in the past, is that since this is a diagnostic assessment, our students with disabilities do not receive their accommodations on this assessment. So this is a true reflection of where they are without those accommodations. There continues to be a gap between special and general education students. However, I do have a few highlights to note. For the highest percent of improvement we saw was in first grade. We also saw the smallest gap between general and special education students with regards to improvement from BOY to MOY in second grade. And also in second grade, there were 8% fewer students with disabilities who showed a decline from BOY to MOY as compared to general education students. So now looking at our TRC data from BOY to MOY, again, there is no accommodations that students are provided for this assessment. One thing to note here is that in grade 2, we had 20.6% of students with disabilities who improved from BOY to MOY, which was almost double that of general education students. So very excited about that. Right, which is why we, which is why we've been very intentional on making sure that general and special education teachers receive that professional development, and through the academic planning facilitator inputs that we're just intentional about those instructional strategies because they can meet the needs of all students. Absolutely. All right, so now we're going to look at math. We had a lot of similar supports for math that we did for literacy that we provided. One thing that we were really excited about this year is for all professional development for systemic PD days. For math, we had a special and a general education teacher co-facilitate that professional development. And we were able to do that for all teachers were included, all math teachers, general and special education teachers, and we were able to do that from kindergarten to 8th grade. Also, again, we had the targeted professional development during early release days for our multi-grade and citywide teachers. Again, the high alignment to the high leverage practices. We have a special education liaison aligned with the design team for APF monthly meetings for math as well, and then that coaching support from our special education liaisons. So now we're going to look at the ANET data. This is window 2 results for this school year. We do see a 12% gap in performance. However, we are seeing promising gains, which I will get to in a moment. We also see that students in LRE A are outperforming our students in LRE B and C with a standards aligned math assessment. So this is looking at particular grades. So we see the smallest gaps in performance in grade 1, grade 7, and in algebra 1. We also see the largest gap in 3rd grade between general and special education students. However, we see a dip in 3rd grade for general education as well. And so what often happens right in 3rd grade, we really focus on multiplication and fractions. So if students don't have those foundational skills of addition and subtraction, then there will be some gaps in learning there. So that's where a focus on, which we've had for the last 2 years, a focus on the implementation of those interventions for math to build up those foundational skills become critical. So this is looking at the student group, so we can see the comparison of general ed education students and special education students. Again, here we see that students in LRE A are performing, have a better performance than students in LRE B and C. So we know that when students are included with their non-disabled peers, that their performance is better. A couple highlights to note that special education growth did match general education growth for window 1 to window 2 from 1819 to 1920 at a 1.4 percentage points. Students with disabilities in LRE A, like I said, showed improvement of a 2 percentage points, performing better than students in LRE B and C. High school students with disabilities in Algebra 1 improved by 12.6 percentage points. Grade 8 students with disabilities in Algebra 1 improved by 8.9 percentage points, and students with disabilities in Algebra 2 improved by 6.8 percentage points. So now we're going to look at the domain analysis. So this is very exciting. When we look at the domains and the comparison from last year, we've seen growth in almost every domain across the board except for 3. So the largest growth we saw was interpreting fraction functions and interpreting categorical data. And we know that these domains are very complex, so that was very encouraging to see. We also continue to show improvement in operations and algebraic thinking, which is a heavier focus in 3rd grade. Domains that continue to be on the decline or we see no improvement are indicated above: the expressions and equations, number system, and linear and quadratic. What we know about those, though, is that they are the major content for those specific grades, and they are also the longest modules, so they're more complex. Okay, so now we are going to discuss secondary transition.
Good afternoon. So as we continue to close the achievement gap between students with disabilities and non-disabled peers, we want to make sure that our students are prepared once they leave Baltimore City schools. Through that, we are planning for their exit through purposely, strategically aligning agency linkage to agencies and support services and providing with opportunities for transition services. I want to talk to, I want to talk to you today about the work that we have done this year so far. We have hosted a transition fair in November where we had transition monitors, school-based general educators, special educators, IEP chairs, students, parents, and agency representative all under one roof to provide an umbrella of services so students would get a chance to talk with agency representatives about supports that are available to them post-secondary school, once they graduate school, and also give them an opportunity to learn about careers within their chosen field. We had members from Disability Administration, from DOORS, our Division of Rehabilitation Services, members from our Behavioral Health Administration, and members from the Division of Labor and License to talk to students to afford them with opportunities once they leave school. Research has shown that if students are engaged and connected prior to leaving school, chances of them of being successful post-school has increased. In Baltimore City, we have 3 transition programs that I would like to speak of. We have the Baltimore Transition Connection, where students are on the grounds of 3 colleges, Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore City Community College, and Coppin University. They are receiving their special education related services along with pursuing opportunities for community integration, and they're receiving supports to enable them to explore job placement within those different agencies. Project Search is a national program where students are going through a 3-week 3-rotation system with the University of Maryland, University Hospital, where they're not only learning the skills and concepts for work, they are also receiving paid internships within those hospital rotations. They are selected and appointed to positions based on their interests, their experience, and their needs. Our work with Maryland State Department of Education was highlighted this November during our fall PLO, where members of Baltimore City was able to present to other members of LEAs regarding our integrated work that we're doing with our College and Career Readiness Office, preparing students for post-secondary options. One of the highlights that we were able to present was the work that in collaboration that we're doing with our school counselors, as school counselors are attending IEP meetings and are guiding students through the course of study, and also the collaboration with our College Career Office to provide opportunities through internships, through Humanum, through our Start and Success program, where we have 60 to 80 students that will participate in spring internships throughout the 5 hospital sites within the Humanum program. In addition to the Humanum program, we have members of our staff working with our Bridges to Work program, where we are partnering with the Marriott Corporation for Students with Disabilities, providing students with opportunities for career development and paid work experience after school. So we're trying to improve our connectivity with post-secondary options by collaborating with both offices within our Baltimore City school system and our community partners. Excuse me. So I'm turning it back over to Dr. Brooks, please.
So as we discussed earlier, really using the data to inform our strategy in moving forward, but also recognizing that there's still some challenges that lie ahead. So as we begin to discuss some of those challenges in the work, we're going to start with some of the challenges that we are still facing regarding specially designed instruction.
So some of the challenges that we continue to see are with IEP teams making decisions around academic goals and prioritizing those academic goals. So there continues to need to be a focus and support with IEP teams. Also, we see inconsistent collaboration with special and general education teachers, which leads to IEPs not being aligned to lesson plans, scaffolding instruction to meet students' needs to ensure that students can access the content is inconsistent, and also implementation of specially designed instruction. We also see some inconsistencies with regards to how teams are monitoring or how teachers are progress monitoring students' growth towards IEP goals and objectives within the curriculum.
In the area of post-secondary transition, one of the challenges is starting early. We have also always focused on secondary with students in the high schools. Now we need to start focus on students within middle grades. So we're combining our efforts and making sure that we're targeting schools with students with middle grades to work with teachers and students to provide opportunities for internships, career exploration, self-advocacy, and self-determination, so students can be prepared once they leave school.
As we begin to continue to look at disproportionality, again, really focusing on those multi-grade classrooms, where are we providing those services for the students that are receiving specially designed instruction, really focusing on the LRE, trying to meet, not just to say that we're meeting the state target, but intentionally looking at where students are receiving services and making sure that those services are appropriate for the students. And then also really addressing behavior and looking to see where this behavior is stemming from. Is it from adverse childhood experiences? And then how are we providing tools for our teachers, general educators, special educators, building administrators, other support staff within the building, so that we can support everyone, the school community at large, to be able to support all in the building.
So earlier, Dr. Brooks talked about how we are collaborating across multiple offices and across multiple stakeholders to really align our resources and collaborate around support. So with regards to data-informed decision-making, really ensuring that we are using data cycles to drive program implementation, and we have opportunities to collaborate around the data to look specifically at trends. Also evidence-based practices, ensuring that we are collaborating and offering opportunities for teachers to engage in professional learning that aligns the content to those evidence-based practices. Again, the strategic collaboration, as Dr. Brooks talked about earlier, with monthly special education stat, where various stakeholders come together and not only analyze data, but really problem solve around how to support schools in very targeted and strategic professional development. This year, we're also using quantitative and qualitative data to be able to provide very targeted and strategic support to our schools through school data support cycle. So first, really analyzing those data trends. What is the data telling us about what our schools need and what we're seeing? Also prioritizing those specific needs for schools based on the data through collaboration. Developing very strategic support plans. So not only analyzing the data, but also meeting with school teams to develop a plan of support through a continuous cycle. That includes implementation and coaching and monitoring as well.
And then as we move forward, providing professional development for both our general educators and special educators with a focus on data-driven decision-making, really using the data to inform our practice. And then providing support and coaching through modeling for our teachers, because many times we provide the professional development for our teachers, but our teachers want to say, well, then what does this look like in my classroom for the student population that I have before me? For our school leaders, really providing support around staffing and budgeting. We just went through budget collaboratives, and we had actual staff from special education to really talk and walk through what this looks like for their schools, as well as providing targeted support through their CLN meetings. So tomorrow, we're actually going to be providing staffing and scheduling support at a CLN meeting tomorrow, where we're actually going to say, okay, we've gone through your budget collabs. This is what your scheduling and your budget is going to look like next year, your staffing. So let's walk through and do some mock schedules together. For IEP chair training with a focus on instruction. So if the IEP chair is facilitating the IEP meetings, let's have a conversation around instruction, what instruction looks like. And then during the IEP chair trainings, we also now have where the IEP chair brings for a portion of this training, a general educator and or special educator to the IEP chair training. Also, for some of the trainings, related service providers, because it is a team decision so that there's team professional development together. For our related service providers, again, we're talking about a more inclusive model. So when we're talking about a more inclusive model, then as we're having IEP teams, not having related service providers say, well, we're going to do a pull-out. But how about the related service provider also pushing in to provide, especially our SLPs? If we're talking about language development, especially for our early learners, pushing in and providing that support. when we're talking about our district office support, really providing additional support for our district office staff around coaching and developing those coaching skills. And then for our families, providing additional workshops for CCAC. This summer during our Special Education Institute, we invited the president of the CCAC to participate in the Special Education Institute, and she was able to participate in those trainings. Next year, we're also going to invite PCAB to join as well. So these are just some of the things that we have done. We know that there's still challenges. We know that we still need to improve, and we are working to make those improvements and what we would like to do moving forward. So if there's any additional questions.
I'd like to just give a shout out to you and your team, Dr. Brooks, for the work that is happening in this area. Just something briefly, and it touches on what you were just talking about with the moving forward and with that plan. And you raised it earlier throughout you all raised it earlier throughout the conversation, making sure that general educators are able to effectively supervise the transition of students that are coming to them. I think that's important. So the work that you're talking about that is happening with bringing those general ed and special ed teachers with the IEP chair, I think that's important. Another thing that I'd like to mention is the capacity of school staff. I think that also is a challenge for us in making sure that, as you said, which I think is just wonderful, Dr. Brooks, the special educator, the IEP chair focusing on instruction, because then that kind of takes some of the brunt off of the professional learning that we do systemically, to allow those IEP chairs to start implementing more of those strategies with the teachers that are teaching the students. So I think that's important. I just wanted to raise that because I think I see it quite often in the classroom every day, students who are transitioning in from maybe self-contained rooms or things like that. They're coming into the setting now, and I don't think teachers often have the skill set to really monitor still the IEP with those students in addition to the other students. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you. Commissioner Chinya?
The one area that I'd like to just, and I'm hoping that they're sort of in one of the groups that you're mentioning, but it still seems to be an area that's lacking in schools, and that's around the SST and the 504 chairs. And I know it's not all your responsibility, because there are not students that are officially, identified as needing special education services. But what, if anything, is happening around better training and continuous sort of accountability in terms of what happens? I hear a lot from schools that, I know SST just from my own experience, but a lot of places it still seems like it's a foreign language to some people.
So I know that, and I'll let Jalima also speak, the Office of Special Education and the Office of Teaching and Learning are working collaboratively around this work. 504 does sit in the Office of Special Education, and many times the 504 chair and the SST chair are one and the same. And so beginning last year, there started being the quarterly meetings and webinars for them to be able to build muscle around that, especially around the IDEA pieces of 504, because those are still students with disabilities. They just don't need the instructional piece. They need access. And so I do know that there's been more support around that and identifying what those accommodations and modifications are for 504. I know that there was just a meeting today with SST and 504 because I know they came together to have a meeting, and I know there has been more intentional work around SST, and I'll let Jalima speak to that.
Yes, SST actually lives in teaching and learning in my department. So SST this year, we actually have 2 staff that are excuse me, 2 staff that are focused on SST. So we've been able to provide a lot of training this year to SST chairs. We have training on systemic PD days as well as open clinics. And we've been able to partner with Dr. Brooks and some of the related service provider teams who offer monthly clinics to be able to add the SST layer to that and have drop-in clinics monthly for SST chairs who need support with SST plans. We also have inputs that we have shared with school managers to be delivered to school leaders, because we know that school leaders play a critical role with regards to ensuring that SST structures are in place. In addition to that, in professional development, we've really been focused with the SST chairs on helping them and their staff understand that there should be interventions that happen for students prior to being referred to SST. And that's extremely important to ensure that we do not have, students aren't going just straight from general education, straight to SST, and then oftentimes into special education, that we're really providing intentional interventions and really unpacking data to understand, what are the needs of our students and what is the data telling us about those specific needs, so that interventions can be intentional. And even when we do develop SST plans, when we've documented that other interventions don't work, those SST plans are really intentional and targeted and focused on that young person's need. So there's a lot of work to do, but we've been doing that work this year and really collaborating with other offices around this. So the work will continue. But yes, there's been a very heavy focus this year around SST.
Can I throw something in there too? Just to be very honest about it, I think, Commissioner Chinya, you mentioned that sometimes it's a foreign language. I think our schools know SST generally, right? But I think to the depth that Jalima talked about still is an issue. I think the bigger issue is, just like Dr. Brooks said, the same person that's doing 504 is doing SSTs. And getting everyone around the table for as many students that need support, I think, is a challenge at some of our schools. And there's not an easy answer for it right now. I just want to be really honest about it. They might be holding SST meetings, but I think Jalima also either alluded to this or directly said it. You should really be having follow-ups to it to see if the interventions worked. And so it's not just a meeting. And so when you have a number of kids that really need the support and you need follow-up meetings, I think we're still lacking in really the capacity to get it done to the level that we need.
And I also think that there's still a need for families to understand the all of this process. That if your children need interventions, where interventions start in the classroom. And from there, where you can go. I'm not certain that families still understand that very well. And so they are also surprised sometimes suddenly to hear that there's a meeting being called. So I think we need to do a better job of that. But I'm glad to hear that the work that is being done now, and I look forward to continuing.
I have a few questions from Commissioner Roberts, who is at home taking care of one of my favorite city school students who is sick, Sion. Pray for her too, because hopefully she doesn't get sick as a result. But if we can reference slide 11 for her, she's watching and sending me stuff at the same time. She first wanted to thank you for providing the board with the updated continuum of services, which is referenced in slide 11. She says city schools preschool LRE is 75.8%, MSTEs is 59.6%. I'm assuming that the LRE being referenced here is LREA. She's saying, what supports are in place to assist general education instructors to provide individualized curriculum and attention to typical and atypical students?
Sure. So currently we have 10 early learning support team members who go into our general education classrooms and they provide support, particularly around special education, to our general ed pre-K and K teachers. So they typically do mostly monthly check-ins with schools unless teachers have an additional request. So if they have a student that they have a concern about, then they schedule a time to go out to observe the student and to really be able to provide interventions to that teacher. And this can be for a student with an IEP or a general education student that you may have a concern with. The hope is that in also being able to provide support to the students, you are also able to coach teachers so that if and when they see other students that are struggling, that they kind of have a toolbox worth of interventions in which they can support other students within their classroom. So we've been doing this model called the collaborative consultation model for at least 6 or 7 years now. So our hope is really that a lot of our general education pre-K teachers, with having this support for a couple of years, now have a more robust toolbox of interventions that they can do for students who they come across in their pre-K and K classrooms. And again, they have this other staff from out of my office that they can call and contact if they feel that the interventions that they have just aren't working, and they can have someone else that they can go and can support them with digging a little deeper.
I also want to add that in collaboration with the related service providers as well as with the Early Learning Office, that there has been a greater push to really look at what's age appropriate and developmentally appropriate behavior. So often we've heard, a teacher say, well, this 3 or 4-year-old is displaying some inappropriate behavior, but they're tantruming. Well, they're 3 or they're 4. And so by having these additional supports come out to say, well, this is developmentally appropriate for this student, but these are some strategies or supports that can be put in place so that this student can remain with his or her typical peers. So I just want to add that.
That's helpful. She also referenced slide 24. She says, understanding the challenges that are listed in slide 24, do we have data around student retention, student regression, or where they are currently placing in comparison to their typical peers due to these challenges identified in the work? For example, IEP, lesson plan alignment like you talked about, and scaffolding instruction to meet the needs of individual learners.
I mean, we would have to get that. We can get that data for the board around retentions to specifically look at that. Like I shared earlier, we have been intentional with regards to professional learning for teachers around how to ensure that they are able to take the IEP and align it specifically to lesson plans. We are looking, though, at the progress, how schools are indicating progress towards IEP goals and IEPs, and how that relates to failure, like students failing core subjects. So we are starting to look at that and unpack that data, and special education liaisons are going to schools and asking the questions now before we wait to retention to see, where is the mismatch there? How are students making progress on IEPs, but they're failing specific courses, and then making, providing support to schools as a result. But we can get that data for the board.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, once they have that data, they are also teaming students to come back to the table and see what additional supports may be working, what additional services student may need, and making sure that the needs are being met through the development of the IEP, and also, like Jalima said, through the implementation of it and the monitoring of that.
And even looking forward, I think for the board, when we're looking at drafting the calendar too, moving forward, making sure as best as we possibly can to make sure that those teacher conferences are happening kind of earlier, around that progress support interim period, so that we can really have more conversations like this that are fruitful to avoid the retention of students, I think would be helpful. I think that's it, unless anyone else has any additional questions. Thank you all for this. It's heavy work, but I think you all are the right folks with the eyes on it. So thank you so much. Thank you. We're now ready for procurement.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Vogel, the Interim Director of Procurement.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vogel.
There are 6 items on the agenda tonight. The first is an increase in the estimated annual amount of contract with New Vision Youth Services for Culture and Climate Services from $1,163,000 annually to $2,150,000. The current contract term is August the 28th of 2019 through June 30th of 2022.
My question here is, we have, and I believe we have an extensive array of menu options for schools to choose from in this regard. Why is this particular vendor coming, if I'm making sense in what I'm asking?
Here you go. I guess she's not here.
There's someone right behind you.
Good afternoon, Casey Mangle, Special Assistant to the Chief Academic Officer. So to help answer your question, it is not that we have more schools seeking this service with this particular vendor. It's that the schools that are already partnering with this vendor have a scope of services that is such that it has exceeded the cutoff where we had previously with their contract.
So those 11 schools, I think, that were referenced.
Exactly. So they built scopes that went above and beyond, and we just don't want them to have that gap in service.
Thank you.
Sure.
The next item is an increase in the estimated annual amount for promotional items from $510,000 to $865,000 annually. The board originally approved this contract on April 25th of 2017. Term of the contract is April 26th of 17 through April 25 of 2022.
With this, when I saw it, I saw a lot of what was in the letter, things that dealt with PBIS. I'm just curious to know
correct.
if we have external partners or some nonprofit organizations that can also support this type of work that could supplement or support or enhance in some sort of way, instead of us having to increase that
And
money.
that, I'm not aware of those. We have not done that from the procurement standpoint. We were looking at putting contracts together for vendors to make this happen. I don't know if there's other vendors out there that would do this on a volunteer basis.
That would potentially donate. It was just a thought that I had because we're looking at wristbands and cups and incentives in that regard. I'm just curious to know if there are perhaps some nonprofit partners that can support this type of work, so that schools don't have to front that cost. It's just an idea that I had, something that I'll probably think about in the future also.
We can check, sure. The next item is a competitively solicited contract with multiple vendors to provide mathematics and literacy intervention programs. The estimated contract total is $10 million, which includes the renewals. The contract term is March 11th of 2020 through March 10th of 2023, with 1 2-year renewal option.
In that letter, I saw all of the things. I saw the cross-functional work that was happening, several folks that were in the review of the vendors. I'm curious to know if we have a perhaps standardized rubric or something of some sort when looking at curriculum supplements and intervention materials, like a checklist almost, because I know that this is good work that's happening, but what will happen in the future to kind of make the process a bit easier, but to also ensure that we have high quality materials in front of our young people and for our school staff.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. I'm Matt Griffin from the Office of Teaching and Learning. We did develop a standard rubric for this process that will be used in the future if we do this again. It was developed in coordination with a lot of the offices that you see listed in the board letter.
Just like for city schools to have a brand, like just branding the work that we do, because I think it's great work in a lot of areas. I do think it's great. Thank you.
Thanks. The next item is an increase in the contract with the new teacher project from $661,000 to $949,000 to provide additional comprehensive recruitment and strategic staffing support for our designated concentration of poverty schools to improve the learning environment for our students. The board initially approved this contract on July 23rd of 2019. It has a contract term of July 1 of 2019 through June 30th of 2022. The next item you heard about a little earlier. It's a contract with Urban Teacher Center. It's an alternative teacher certification program to recruit, select, train, coach, and support a cohort of UTC resident teachers. The contract total is $2,625,000. The contract term is July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. And the last item is a contract increase for Epic e-discovery solutions from $50,000 to $100,000. E-discovery will provide data review and production services for city schools in the matter of Sinclair Broadcasting Group Incorporated versus Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. The contract term will be February 18 of 2020 and will end on June 30th of 2020.
Joe, can we go back to 1202, the promotional items?
Yes, sir.
Contract increase. Again, unlimited are listed online as minority businesses. It's Rudolph Supply and Promotional Unlimited. They're listed online as minority businesses.
Okay.
MBE.
Yes.
So could a requirement not be applied to that? And will we get any credit for them being prime vendors?
We'll have to ask the MBE office, but yes, prime vendors can produce up to 50% of whatever the goal was. In this case, there was no goal, so we'll need to ask Mike how we handle that, though. But you're correct, we should get some sort of credit for the fact that they are MBEs.
Can that come back to us?
Yes, I can send that to you, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Additional? Thank you, Joe.
Okay, you're welcome.
Miss Melissa McDonald. To Tanisha, if you don't mind. Thank you. And is it Miss? Is that fine? Okay.
Hello, my name is Melissa McDonald, and I serve on the executive board of the Baltimore Teachers Union and also as a co-chair of the New Teacher Steering Committee.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Green, pre-K teacher at Southwest Baltimore Charter School and a member of the New Teacher Steering Committee.
Hi, my name is Christina Duncan Evans. I'm the teacher chapter chair of the Baltimore Teachers Union.
And we're here today to present a proposal for how the Baltimore Teacher Union can work together with the district to improve the new teacher experience and new employee experience at New Teacher Institute. And this proposal was created by members of the New Teacher Steering Committee, which is a committee of the Baltimore Teachers Union. And to start, we were going to start by acknowledging that overall, the district has a retention problem. So by the end of the 2018-2019 school year, many teachers had left their position. We know that at the start of this year, there were approximately 600 new teachers that were hired to start. And since that time, many new teachers have left their position. So, we have requested the data from Human Capital, but we have yet to receive the data, so we would like to follow up with the actual data about these numbers. But according to the Learning Policy Institute, research shows that urban districts can, on average, spend more than $20,000 on each new hire, including school and district expenses related to separation, recruitment, hiring, and training. And there, we know currently is a high vacancy rate of teachers. And overall, this really impacts our students because the educators who leave, the positions are filled by long-term subs who don't really know the curriculum well, and they're trying to fill in the missing positions.
What the Baltimore Teachers Union proposes is that we worked with the district office to engage new teachers before the school year starts. We feel we can do this by providing 3 professional development trainings at the New Teacher Summer Institute in August 2020. We also propose to work with the district office to create and co-instruct PSRP training, which has not been included before, for PSRPs in order to better prepare PSRP staff for their positions, increase retention, and add an additional system of support.
So we surveyed new teachers through the New Teacher newsletter in October about their experience at the New Teacher Institute. And we had many results, and overall that there were a lot of effective professional development opportunities, but there were no trainings on behavior management, no training on programs such as Infinite Campus, which are professional expectations, and no access to the students that the teachers were expected to teach.
The way we would do this is to hold 2 2-hour sessions for teachers, and then to hold 2 half-hour-long sessions led by students in the form of a virtual tour and then a question and answer session.
For PSRPs, we know that there is a greater need for training because there are few PSRPs who are even trained at all and or welcomed into their new roles by the district. In order to be a productive workforce, we think that new PSRPs deserve equitable training, just the same as teachers. And they also fulfill many different roles and different expectations, and they are doing so currently without any introductory training.
Thank you. I know that Chief Grant Skinner is here, and I know that several members of his staff was here. I'm sure that for the follow-up that you discussed before you leave, if you could just connect while
Sure.
we're still here for that. Definitely appreciate you all coming today, and thank you. Any questions from?
I just have one thing to say.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming again as well, Commissioner.
Thank you.
But one thing I want to mention, when you distributed your paper, make sure when we're reading it, so we can be clear, like we were just saying, make sure you connect with Mrs. Skinner. When you said that 600 new teachers were hired at the start of 2019 and 2020, no data was shown. You didn't put anything about, you say some of the new teachers have left. You must show, do you know how many teachers left?
Well, we know that there were 600 teachers that started because that's what they announced at the New Teacher Institute. We know that many have left from inside word at Human Capital, but the data we've been waiting on, so we can't do anything
We've put
without.
in a request.
Excuse me?
We've put in a request for the data, but we haven't received it yet.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll get it, but when you put it down here, I was confused. I guess, when you say 600 teachers and then say many have left without knowing, so we really need to find out how many.
We definitely agree with you that we need to find out how many.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Our next meeting will be on May 5th, 2020. We do not have a meeting in April because of spring break. I am excited about that. Hopefully you have grandkid plans, Commissioner Cheney, for spring break.
Yeah, rest.
Okay. And at that meeting, we will be focusing on policy IHB, charter schools compliance reporting. We won't necessarily focus on the policy, but it will be more of a compliance report being presented at that meeting. Operator renewal, and our mid-year performance data, which should be a very interesting presentation and topic. Thanks to everyone that was here this afternoon. We are adjourned at 5:28. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.